everyone, today I'm going to be giving you a tour of our vegetable garden so you can see what it looks like in May. We are located in Virginia, Zone 7. We have a combination of raised beds and in-ground gardens, and this front area here is our raised bed section. We have some 3x8 raised beds and also some 3x6 and 2x3s in the center. Starting off with the first bed on the left side, in this very front here we have some red Russian kale, and we've been harvesting this. It's been doing really well, hasn't had too much pest damage, and then interplanted with those we also have some pepper plants. Right after I uploaded the video for April, we actually did have a late frost, and some of the pepper plants that were in here last time have unfortunately died, but we went to a local nursery and picked up some starts for a few varieties, so I just popped those in their place. And then this one big bare area that had a lot of pepper plants that died, I just popped in some zucchini seeds because those will fill out really nicely in that area. I've started some new seeds for peppers, but those will take a while to get going. So meanwhile, I figured I would at least put something else in this place so that it's not going to waste. On the other side of the bed, we have some collard plants, and we've been harvesting some of this as well, but this is a little more holy and has more slugs than the kale. So here you can see this tiny little baby slug. They are so annoying to get out because they're so small, and we've also been dealing with some damage from cabbage loopers. You can see the poop on this leaf here, so they've been eating some of the leaves. There are still some good leaves there for sure, so we've been harvesting those, and we'll probably just get like 1 or 2 harvests before we pull this out because they're also starting to go to seed. At the end of this bed, we have a few more pepper plants. These ones were not planted out before that frost, so luckily we had a few backups. We have a Korean hot pepper and also a shishito pepper. The shishito pepper, which I'm showing you here, is already starting to set fruit, and it has flowers all up and down the stem, which is pretty awesome. So it looks like we could get a really good harvest just from this one surviving plant. So I'm pretty happy that we had at least one backup for this. The second bed, which is a 3x6 bed, last month had a bunch of eggplant. All of the foliage that was above ground for these pepper plants did die in that frost, but amazingly 4 out of 6 have started to put on new growth, because even though all the foliage was dead above ground, the plant was still protected underneath where the roots were still alive. So I've just left these in here for now. I don't know if they'll be stunted, but until my new seedlings are up and running, I figured I might as well just let these have a shot since they survived. In the other half of the bed, we've planted a bunch of bush beans. These have been repeatedly attacked by slugs. We have some good ones and also some not so good ones, but hopefully we'll get at least a few beans from there. The next bed has a bunch of our root vegetables. So we have a nice little bunch of carrots here. The foliage is doing really well. These weren't doing so well since the slugs were eating them, but after they got to a certain point, they have been growing really quickly and they haven't really been bothered. We also have some beets. And then we have these white Japanese turnips, which are really good. Then we have a couple of lettuce plants. This is like a romaine type lettuce. And then we have a row of daikon radishes that I wanted to try planting in the spring. You're supposed to plant these in the fall, and this is why it goes to seed like pretty much straight away in the spring. And I've just left these because it's kind of like a cover crop right now and prevents other stuff from growing, but it's really not going to grow a root and we're not going to be able to harvest that, so we'll just feed that to the chickens. Then we have 2 heads of Napa cabbage. Those lower leaves are looking a little rough, but the centers look okay. And at this point they're growing really quickly, so I'm hoping that we'll be able to harvest something in the centers later on. Then we have a line of cilantro. This is kind of like a one-time harvest kind of crop for us because it goes to seed really quickly. And I just harvested this all the other day and got a big bowl full. And I just chopped those up and covered them with water in an ice cube tray and froze them for when we make salsa later in the season. We have 4 more heads of Napa cabbage. Hopefully those will make it. They're looking okay right now. And at the end of this bed, we have our A-frame trellis with our peas, and they have really shot up. They are pretty much at the top of the trellis at this point. They're putting on lots of really pretty flowers, and I even spotted this one little baby pea, which is really exciting. This is a snow pea variety, which is one that you eat like the shell and everything, not just the pea inside, and we really like snow peas. It's also just a pretty flower to have in the garden. Underneath that, we have arugula and spinach. The arugula has completely gone to seed, but that's okay because this was a really good trap crop for flea beetles, so it served a purpose even if we didn't get to eat much of it. And next to that, we have the spinach. Some of them on the edges that get more exposure to the sun have started to bolt, but a lot of the ones in the middle are actually pretty good. And we've harvested a few bowls full of this spinach, so we've gotten just a little bit out of it. Spinach bolts really easily as well, so it's a little hard for us to grow it in the spring, but having it under this trellis gives it a little bit more protection so that you can get at least 1 or 2 harvests out of it before it goes to seed. But this will be a better crop for us to try growing in the fall. The next bed, again, is pretty much empty. It's been empty for a few months. I'm just trying to figure out what to put here because we might do some like vertical trellising. But we do have a couple of Swiss chard plants here that are starting to look really good, and hopefully by next month I'll have something to show you in this bed. In the next bed, we have our leeks and onions, which we grew from seed. The leeks are doing really nicely. They're starting to thicken up at the base and get their characteristic flatter leaves that you couldn't really see before. The onions are starting to get thicker as well, and we've been harvesting all of the radishes that we've interplanted in this bed as well. The next bed has a few more onions and also some tomato plants, along with a few scattered flowers. These nasturtiums were completely killed by the frost, but somehow came back from the root, and the same thing happened with most of our tomatoes. I think 5 out of 6 of them ended up growing back from the base, so it just goes to show you how resilient plants can be, even if they go through weather extremes or some neglect. A lot of times they'll still just grow just fine on their own. Luckily, I did have a couple of backups for this variety, which you can see here. It's definitely a lot bigger and further along than the ones that have died, so we'll just see what happens and see if those ones that are regrowing end up catching up. At the end of the bed, we also have a ground cherry plant. This is kind of like a fruit that is related to the tomatillo. It grows in these husks, and when it falls to the ground, there's like this little berry type thing inside that's a little tart, a little sweet, that's really good. And I just noticed that there's actually a couple developing in there, so that's really exciting. In our last larger bed, we have one more ground cherry. We have a row of carrots and beets, and eventually our A-frame trellis is going to be moved over here. But for now, I just wanted to pop these things in the center that are going to go under that trellis. We also have some lettuce. This was all from a mesclun mix of lettuce, and I just separated out a few seedlings so that they can grow into larger heads. We have a line of dill, which is looking really good, and we've been harvesting this to make like an herbed cream cheese for our radish toasts. We have a couple of baby parsley plants. They look really small now, but they are going to get huge. This is a really big, giant variety of parsley that we grew last year, and it was awesome. We also have our celery plants, which are doing really well, finally. They've taken so long to start growing, but it looks like they're starting to get a lot bushier now. We have a few lemongrass plants. Lemongrass will take a while to develop that stalk that's good for cooking, but the leaves are really good for tea for now. And at the end, we have a bunch of calendula plants. Then in our center 2 beds, we have our blueberries and some strawberries around them as well. The blueberries are doing okay. They are starting to set fruit. Some of them have fallen off. I think it's a pollination issue when fruit doesn't set like that, but we definitely have some good clusters that look like they're staying on, and the strawberries are also starting to produce fruit as well. To the side of all of these raised beds, we have these 2 built-in trellis areas, and for each of these we're going to be growing squashes and gourds up on them. So on this first one we have some delicata squash, which has just sprouted. Then in between these 2 trellises, there's a bunch of flowers and herbs and that kind of thing. My goal with this was to have flowers that would bring pollinators into the vegetable garden, but that also have a use, whether it's like edible or good for tea. I really love plants that are kind of like dual purpose in this way. So we have things like garlic chives, borage, which the flowers are edible, anise hyssop, which is good for tea, The hyssop especially is supposed to be really good for the bees and the pollinators. We also have some poppies, and this is a bread seed variety that forms a really big pod that has a lot of seeds that you can just harvest for poppy seeds. And then we have larkspur, which isn't an edible, but I just think it's really pretty. These are all planted in the spring and they're kind of small, but actually in our front garden we have some poppies and larkspur, and you can see how massive they are. They're starting to put out these giant pods, and I'm really excited to see what the flowers look like and see what those dried pods with the poppy seeds look like. And then this is one larkspur plant that we have in our front garden as well. I can't believe that this one tiny plant that was there all throughout winter turned into this really majestic, beautiful plant. It's gotten so tall and bushy, it makes a really good cut flower, and I just think it's so pretty. Okay, now back to the second trellis. In that little area, we have some gourds here. I'm actually not really sure what these are called. My mom gave me these seeds. They're kind of like an Asian fuzzy gourd. I think they're just called fuzzy melons, but we'll just see what grows. It should be interesting to see what comes out. At the very end of this bed, I have a few plants of bee's friend, which is a really fascinating flower. It reminds me of like fiddlehead ferns, the way they unfurl, but they're just really pretty and unique looking. Now moving on to our back garden area. These are our in-ground gardens, and we usually have our crops that take up more space or more production type of crops back here. So in these first few beds on the right side of the pathway, the first bed has corn and radishes that we planted up in a previous video, and those have just started popping out from the ground. We have radishes on the right here and corn on the left. There's not too much to look at in the next two beds, so I'll just skip over those really quickly, but I did want to show you that one rutabaga at the end of this row that has gone to seed and is now flowering. It is so majestic. It's basically as tall as I am, and it's just really incredible that that came from like a root vegetable that we eat. Next we have another bed of onions and radishes. These are onions that we got as sets, and they are just starting to bulb up, and we've been harvesting lots of these radishes, which are doing better in this in-ground garden than in our raised beds, surprisingly. And I think I'll be making a video about different recipes to use with radishes soon. Next we have our bed of soft neck garlic, which should be ready to harvest in a few weeks to a month, and then an empty bed because we just harvested our hard neck garlic just this past week. Then on the other side of the pathway, we have three other rows. This first row is our asparagus bed, which we've been harvesting from and eating lots of, and some of those skinnier spears that we've let grow out have started developing these fronds. They've already gotten so tall and floppy that we've had to stake them up. I think most people don't really know how asparagus grows, and I'm pretty sure we didn't before we were growing it either, so it's pretty cool to watch the process and see how they turn into these really tall, wispy plants from that tiny little spear. At the front of this bed we have a comfrey plant. I'm not going to go too in depth about all the uses for comfrey, but it's a really good plant to have in the garden. You can look it up and do some research if you want to, but it's starting to flower right now, and the flowers are really pretty and the bees love them as well. The next bed is our tomato bed. Again, we had some damage from that late frost, but some of them have started to grow back, and we also went and purchased some more starts for these just to compensate for the few that we lost. And we're starting some new seeds again because tomatoes grow really quickly. Once the tomatoes get larger and actually start setting fruit, I'll go over more the varieties of tomatoes that we're growing. And we have these couple of lettuce plants that I wanted to show you. These were here since the fall and overwintered. They were part of a mesclun mix, and these were the only plants that survived the winter, but they have been doing really well in the spring. We've already harvested so much from them, and this one lettuce is just so beautiful. You would never find something like this in the store, and every time I pass by I just have to look at it because it's so pretty. In the last row we have our potato plants, and we've already trenched these once and they have grown so much even since then. They're looking really nice, and maybe soon we'll be able to dig under there and get some little new potatoes to eat. That's pretty much it for our main gardens, but I just wanted to show you a few little things around the yard. First, we have this grapevine that's on the side of our shed, and it started to put out all of these little clusters of grapes, which is really exciting to see. There are a lot more than there were last year, and last year we only got to eat a few, so hopefully this year we'll get something. I'm really excited to try some homegrown grapes. Behind the shed we also have this peach tree, which is doing amazing. It had beautiful flowers in the spring, and it started to put off all of these fuzzy little peaches, and hopefully they make it before any birds or squirrels get them. In front of our greenhouse, we also have a couple of beds of strawberries, and these have started to ripen and we're starting to harvest them by the bucketfuls, and we've been enjoying so many fresh strawberries. And I'm going to be doing a video soon about a really easy and healthy low sugar strawberry jam. So that is it for May's garden tour. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.